on the left, we have got Sam Zakshevsky up against Seth Manfield, number 2 ranked in the world, 3 points behind Reed Duke on Mono Red Aggro, up against Grixis Midrange.
Yeah, now Seth Manfield, he's done everything you can possibly do in Magic. He's a Pro Tour champion. He is a world champion. He is a Grand Prix champion. He is not, however, a national champion. Here, he is playing Mono Red, but a little bit of a different version than we're used to seeing. He has Gitu Lava Runner and Wizard's Lightning in his deck. And alongside those Soul Scar mages, that's a decent number of wizards. So getting to play 1-drops that actually have 2 toughness and dodge Chain Whirler, an interesting choice. And I've seen the deck list that Seth is playing 5-0 a few different standard leagues in the hands of a couple different people.
All right, and we've got 2 Beaumont Couriers up against just a tapped Canyon Slew, joined also by a Soul Scar Mage. A couple of cards underneath those Beaumont Couriers. Seth is off to a pretty aggressive start. We see 3 1-drops already on the battlefield. And I think you were describing, this deck is a little bit lower to the ground. Also, that Soul Scar Mage is going to be that Wizard. It's going to meet the requirement for a Wizard's Lightning if it is needed.
Yeah, now Sam, finally getting here onto the battlefield. It is only turn 2, but now already he's in a situation where he may find himself already looking for some trades here.
Yeah, and of course, probably breathing a sigh of relief as Seth is tapping 1 mana and not going for the 3. That would mean a Goblin Chain Whirler up against this Glintsleeve Siphoner because it is a 2-1. That would be a massive setback for Sam, and it's just going to be a shock that takes it down, clears the way, and this is actually a swing for 4 because of that prowess.
Absolutely, and that's a really nice trade for Seth. Seth's trading 1 mana and 1 card for the 2 mana that Sam spent, and now he even gets to leave open mana for a removal spell or a Beaumont Courier activation.
That's true with the 2 red mana available. Otherwise, it's a Canyon Slew. It's an Ether Hub for Sam. Let's see if he can come up with anything else. Those Beaumont Couriers, when you've got 2 of them on the battlefield, might be able to cash them in for quite a few cards later.
Yeah, and especially against a deck like Grixis Midrange that doesn't have a board sweeping effect, such as Fumigate, especially not in Game 1. It's likely that you're going to have those things stick around for some time while you empty out your hand.
And Seth heading into his turn, he's been untouched, yet he is at 20. Sam already down to 13, and looks like we are going to lose one of these Beaumont Couriers to a Magma Spray, so the field a little bit diminished, but it's a Hazoret that is going to come down to the battlefield to replace it. It gets to turn sideways. This is a big swing to follow up the loss of the Beaumont Courier, and it looks like Sam has not got a whole lot of a response just yet.
Sam already in range to die in the following turn.
Cast down on the Beaumont Courier. That is a lot of potential cards that have been lost to the mail system. Will not be delivered. Hope Seth got for the insurance on that one.
It's a tracking number.
Ooh. So Hazoret and the Soul Scar Mage knock Sam down to 7. He is going to cycle a Canyon Slew, looking for just about anything at this point. I mean, the Hazoret alone attacks for 5, and it's able to throw a card for the final bit of damage. That is enough to do it. Seth, Game 1, heavily in his favor.
Yeah, especially being on the play there. Sam, had a chance to get back into that game. If he had had a 4th land and a Vraska's Contempt, then he could have jumped up to 9. Seth would have only had 1 point of power on the table. Yeah, Seth still would have been in a very good position with all those cards under the Beaumont Courier, but Sam did have a window to sneak his way back into that game. This matchup really comes down to aggression versus somebody who's trying to defend against that aggression. And the longer the game goes, the more favored Sam is going to be. So when we're watching people spend resources very aggressively in the early game, we can expect Seth to to be the player who's the player to watch to win in those turns.
Yeah, we also just saw several of those tap lands coming down. That was a huge setback to Sam's game plan. He, was able to put down 1 Canyon Slew, but had to cycle another one later. If that was an untapped land, as opposed to what it was, which it had no option to enter the battlefield untapped, then yeah, we might have been looking at that Vraska's Contempt and the ability to claw back in.
Yeah, and Sam had a reasonable draw there. He had a removal spell and a creature that he played over the course of the first 3 turns of the game. It's just that when you're on the draw against this red deck, especially against a red deck that plays as many 1-drops as Seth's, you're going to find yourself in a pretty rough position a lot of the time.
So as these players are heading into the sideboard, how do you feel about what a lot of these red decks are doing as they head into it, which is sort of moving towards a mid-range strategy? Do you think that Seth is going to be really looking to keep the aggression, or is he going to be exploring that option of really becoming a bigger deck?
So Seth's deck doesn't really have that option the same way other red decks do. Seth is playing fewer lands. He's playing more one-drops. And I think in many ways that may serve him well in post-boarded games over the course of this weekend because people have their sideboard plan for the red deck. And your sideboard plan against the red deck is not necessarily a sideboard plan to beat a hyper-aggressive strategy. It's a sideboard plan that's supposed to, have all the tools you need to beat this mid-range deck that it becomes post-board often. So when you play against a player like Seth, suddenly, you're on the draw again in game 3, and your opponent's deck is still a pile of one-drops, really aggressive spells that can be aimed at the face. The only card that costs more than 3 mana in the deck is Hazoret. Post-board, you can have access to Chandra or Rekindling Phoenix, but there are no Glory Bringers. I mean, this is a powerful deck. It's fast.
And Sam's going to be trying to counter that with his own sideboard, and his sideboard doesn't seem like it's got an enormous amount of tools for this matchup. I see one copy of Chandra's Defeat. Is there anything else that's really standing out to you as a way to sort of temper that aggression?
So I think Hour of Devastation is almost certainly coming in here. Or it is coming in here. It's an answer to a lot of the stuff that Seth is doing. Besides that, you're right. I don't think his sideboard has much to offer, and this game 1 doesn't even feel that great for him. So, Sam, this was probably a matchup he was looking to avoid this weekend. His deck looks like it's pretty well positioned against the field. He does have a lot of very inexpensive removal, which could serve him well here, and a main deck copy of Sweltering Suns. So, his main deck, decent against these aggro decks, but his sideboard doesn't help him out as much.
Yeah, and actually one really big key thing about that Hour of Devastation that you mentioned is that it's actually a pretty suitable answer to a Hazoret itself.
Yes.
Because there is text on that card that says that any of those creatures, they are going to lose indestructible.
Mm-hmm.
And so while that's normally such a huge setback in them being able to answer that enormous creature, it's a pretty reliable way to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, it does cost 5, so a lot of the time you're having to line up a chump block, or you're having to take a hit from the Hazoret first. But, when you're playing a deck that only has so many answers to a card like Hazoret, you don't always have Vraska's Contempt in your hand. You're going to be playing 4 of it, but when you don't have it, it's nice to have another card that can actually deal with something like Hazoret. Hazoret's so good.
Hazoret's...
Like, in a vacuum, it may be the most powerful card in Standard.
I am a huge fan of it. I mean, red cards are already far in my territory, but I've even played with that card a little bit in the Modern realm, tried it a little bit in Affinity, tried it a little bit in some Scred Red shells, tried it a little bit in Jund. Just been trying to force it into basically any shell that I can, just because that card is so much fun and so powerful to play.
Yeah, I've played against a Lantern deck that has Hazoret me post board before in Modern. I've seen that deck in a wide variety. I've seen that card in a wide variety of decks, and it's impressive, even out of a deck like that.
We finally got a good card with, what was it? That was the mechanic from the original Ravnica that really wanted you to have as few cards as possible.
Hellbent?
Hellbent. We finally get a good Hellbent card. It only took about, 13, 15 years.
Yeah, this is definitely the best Hellbent card. The thing is, you can still have a card in your hand.
True.
To work with.
True.
And it helps you get to Hellbent while pressuring the opponent.
I do see that Hour of Devastation, but Sam is going to ship it away. Decided that was not the 7 that he was willing to go to battle with. Seth's still taking a look at his. Keeping a 7 on this side, especially with this Grixis mid-range deck that has got so many of these tapped lands, a mulligan strikes me as being something that could be a pretty decent setback.
Yeah, so a deck like Sam's, not to the same extent that a blue-white deck wants to, but he really needs to hit his first 5 or 6 land drops for his deck to be operating at maximum efficiency. So now what he needs to do is he's going to need to have an opening 5 turns where he is not only playing the land for the turn, but that he also has inexpensive interaction. And for him to have that combination of cards, it's significantly less likely for that to happen when he's mulliganing.
And that 4 and 5 mana is so critical because of the Vraska's Contempt, because of the Hour of Devastation, because that's really where you're going to find the answers that line up well against some of those more devastating cards out of the red deck.
Absolutely. And, I mean, Seth's deck also, it's worth noting, he mulligans worse than a lot of the other red decks in Standard right now because he's made his deck so aggressive and he's playing so much, burn that can potentially go to the dome. When you're playing older formats and you play against burn, it's one of the decks that really mulligans poorly because they're counting to, essentially resolve a certain number of spells. That's different when you're playing red decks that are permanent-based, especially because so many of those permanents are so inexpensive. But Seth's deck doesn't have really that same top-end power that a lot of the red decks we've seen do have.
Yeah, he's got a lot of creatures that are also just weaker to some of the options. I mean, Gitu Lava Runner is in this deck, but it will rarely excel past that X2, so it's even able to be traded with things like the Glintstave Siphoner. It's, those small little chip shots, those small exchanges can actually happen from Sam's deck.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that one does end up actually pretty nice in the end part of the game when it's got haste, potentially.
Yeah, the fact that it can essentially act as a reach in the later stages of the game is quite strong. Also, it's a one-drop to get things going. It helps you empty out your hands so that you can attack with a Hazoret sooner. It turns your Wizard's Lightning into a Lightning Bolt. Does not die to Goblin Chain Whirler. There are a decent number of things going for Gitu Lava Runner.
So it looks like we are enjoying the hand on the left side of the battlefield. These players, mulligans are becoming a little bit of an issue here in this second game. We saw Seth really enjoy his hand, really take down that game one pretty aggressively. We're going to be looking at both of these decks maybe in a somewhat hindered version of their best game.
Yeah. I mean, Sam's still on 6 cards. He could still enact his game plan very well. And even on 5 cards, we could see this red deck play, a 1-drop into a 2-drop and then try to see what its top deck game looks like.
Mm-hmm. And this is going to be the first, really the first match of the day for Seth. He came in off of a couple of buys, so this is really his way to enter into this tournament today, and this is where he's really setting his impression.
Yeah, the round where the best players in the room come off their buys, it kind of has a feeling in the air, if you will, when you're at one of these larger events, because suddenly the tournament gets this injection of all of these powerful wizards that you now might have to face off against.
It's like hitting the second stage rocket.
Yeah,
it's Ether Hub joining the battlefield, and it's just going to be another mountain. No plays yet, and it's just going to be cycling away fetid pools. Keeping the hand full, apparently deciding that, that's not going to be required to continue to hit these land drops. You talked about how Sam is going to be really focusing on making sure that these land drops are acquired, especially for the first 4 or 5 turns. That seems to be happening pretty happily at the moment. It's On-Crop Crasher from Seth off of these 3 mountains. An attack in for 3, and a nice clean Magma Spray, just already picking that up.
And very surprised here that Seth did not have a play until turn 3. He mulliganed to 5, but there are very few cards in his deck that even cost 3 or more. So
that's a Chandra coming down to the battlefield. It's going to plus on up. It's going to hit Seth for 2 damage, and suddenly there's a 5 loyalty Planeswalker that is going to be closing out this game, removing creatures, also just accelerating that mana for some of these more expensive spells. Then you can start maybe double spelling to even remove the Recurring Phoenix if you have, or the Rekindling Phoenix if you have that much mana.
Yeah, getting to untap with a Chandra on 5 loyalty is going to put Sam in an excellent position here. He can combine the Chandra minus with any inexpensive removal spell to get the Phoenix off the table, while also advancing his board state in some other way with the mana he'll have left over. He just has a ton of options here.
Oh, what a hit off of that Chandra. Pluses it up, exiles the top card. It is Vraska's Contempt, able to cast that one, immediately exile the Rekindling Phoenix, gain a couple of life, and Sam's at 22 to Seth's 18 against the red deck.
Yeah, Sam has got to feel good about his position now.
He's got a Soulscar Mage and a Goblin Chain Whirler. That does knock one of that life away. It does knock one of the loyalty away. But even still, this has been a game that Sam has got to feel significantly more confident in, from just not seeing any of those early plays. Seth stacked much lower to the ground. And since then, it has been nothing but answering the plays as they come down.
Yeah, now, Sam, he just has the world is his oyster here, essentially. He could have a bunch of lands in hand, though. We don't really know the contents quite yet.
And there's going to be a Chain Whirler. This might clean up. Yep, the Chandra Torch of Defiance is going to get taken down by that Goblin Chain Whirler in combination with the Soulscar Mage. So Seth is the one left with a board state right now. And it's a Torrential Gear Hulk for the Vraska's Contempt, taking that one down, back up to 22, and a 5-6 on the battlefield.
Yeah, again, Sam, with these super powerful late plays. We talked about it before the game, but later this game goes, the more it's going to favor Sam. And
the Scarab God hits the battlefield as well.
And that is the nail in the coffin, if you will. The Scarab God, 5/5 body, which is already such a nightmare for the red deck. And then if they ever do deal with it, it just comes back to Sam's hand. And in the meantime, it is ending the game very quickly with that activated ability.
You can even go after Seth's own Goblin Chain Whirler and maybe just take that one, have his own creature to start getting those swings in. There is a Hazard on the battlefield. Does not actually line up that well on this board.
No, not at all. Sam's at 20 right now. Seth is kind of on the defensive.
It's not going to be able to block and kill that Torrential Gear Hulk. It can trade with the Scarab God, but the Scarab God, of course, is going to go back to the hand if it finds its way to the graveyard.
Well, it will. It'll live. It's indestructible.
Oh, you're right.
But
you're right.
Even so, it's an interesting question.
So Wizard's Lightning from Seth Manfield here. This is going to combine alongside the Prowess trigger to actually deal lethal to the Scarab God, and it actually keeps the Soulscar Mage alive, because those 3/1/1 counters leave it as a 2/2, and the Soulscar Mage at that point, because the Prowess is a 2/3, survives the exchange and takes down that Scarab God. 5 damage gets in from the Hazoret.
Yeah, and Wizard's Lightning there acting as a full-blown lightning bolt, so
I'm a fan
very
of the
strong
card. So it's going to be Chandra that comes in, back down. We are going to make some mana off of it, use that mana to cast the Scarab God once more. It hits the battlefield, and Seth has seen enough. He's had enough. It's time for Game 3. Hazoret not able to take down Chandra, the Scarab God, and a Torrential Gear Hulk.
Yeah, Seth, they're mulliganing to 5. Definitely not what he wants to be doing, ever. Finds himself in a rough spot there. Sam also on the mulligan there. We watched this Grixis mid-range deck. Once it gets its gears going, it can really just seemingly have every answer in the entire world. Anything it could want to do, it can do.
Yeah, and we're about to actually see Seth back on the play in this Game 3. It's very low to the ground red deck. Is that something that has a lot of considerations from your mind as how Sam is going to approach looking at maybe his opening 7 when you're on the draw against this kind of red deck?
Yeah, so Sam does have a lot of inexpensive removal. He has access to, some cast downs, a fatal push, some magma sprays, some abrades, and if he wants to keep an opening hand, he really needs to have at least one of those, maybe even 2, because in those early turns of the game, especially when you're on the draw, you can find yourself in a situation where it seems like you've already lost if you don't have those cards to match up on the turns that they're played.
I mean, we saw in Game 1, Seth Manfield opened with a Beaumont Courier into a Beaumont Courier and a Soulscar Mage, and the game really just deteriorated from there. He was able to follow up with a Hazoret eventually. He was able to, use one removal spell on the only really pressure that Sam was able to put down on the battlefield, and a lot of that, we didn't see any of that cheap removal.
Yeah, and Seth's deck is really trying to make Hazoret as powerful as possible by playing all of these inexpensive cards. So he's looking to empty his hand. He's looking to use all of his resources so that he can, put this 5-power creature onto the battlefield and have it be attacking right away on turn 4.
What a good card. Yeah. I'm such a fan of Hazoret. Oh, can't get over it. And actually, I think we might have some dueling Rekindling Phoenixes. The Glory Bringers in this matchup on the side of the battlefield that you would not expect. Alongside those Torrential Gear Hulks, there are some Glory Bringers.
Yeah, Sam's deck, kind of a more traditional Grixis mid-range deck.
So, before you were talking a lot about how these decks are really being built, if you're not playing the red deck, if you're not playing the blue-white deck, you're really trying to find yourself in the middle, on one kind of angling against one, angling against the other. As you really start to move against one of those two decks, then you make yourself worse against the other. When you're looking at this deck list, how do you feel about where Sam was trying to put his pressure?
So it looks like Sam was really trying to beat these red decks, trying to beat the aggressive decks. He has a lot of inexpensive spot removal. And against the control decks, he's He's got cards like Doomfall. His sideboard really addresses the control matchup a lot. But his deck is really as far as you can go in terms of trying to beat the more aggressive strategies if you are a Grixis mid-range deck. So Sam built his deck for this game 1, and unfortunately it wasn't good enough against Seth here. But, he definitely has a very good shot of winning this game 3, even on the draw, especially if he has something like a Magma Spray into one of his 2-mana removal spells. He can buy himself enough time where he's playing cards that are just more powerful than the stuff that Seth is putting out.
And his game 2 looked spectacular. There wasn't really at any point in that matchup for Seth that it really felt like he was way ahead or in control of the matchup. Sam had a good grip on that game 2 the entire time.
Yeah, and, Seth's deck, it's a pile of 1 and 2 drops, and he didn't have either in that game.
Yeah, when you're missing the crucial part of the deck, it doesn't always work out too well. Otherwise, I'm just loving the construction of this deck. Having access to, all of these removal spells in the main deck are able to go towards the face. There's the lightning strikes, the shocks, the wizard's lightning. None of those are braids that we've seen a lot in those decks. So really angled at going straight to the face.
Yeah, he doesn't have the same amount of interaction that a braid offers you, but in exchange, his deck has more reach than these other red decks, and there are countless times I can remember where I had an Abrade in my hand and my opponent was at 3. So Seth's deck doesn't have that issue.
Game 1, replaying a little bit, we see a Bomat Courier followed by a Canyon Slough followed by another Bomat Courier. This is just like he did it in Game 1. Now we've got 2 cards underneath the first one card on another. If it's a Soulscar Mage, no, it's a Gitu Lava Runner. So now is where we're going to deviate from the plan.
Yeah.
That Canyon
It was
Slough.
slightly different from Game 1. Very similar.
It's still a 1-2.
Yeah.
So we've got 2 mana available on Sam's side, and he's just going to kick the turn back, holding up some of those potential removal spells. A lot of that interaction you were talking about is at instant speed, potentially holding on to some of it with the intent of really getting a feel of what's going to be coming his way.
Yeah, this turn could be interesting here.
On-Crop Crasher. It's the 3-2 for 3. It's got haste. It can exert itself to eliminate a creature from blocking for the turn, and this is going to be a swing all out. Bomat Courier's gaining a lot of cards, the Gitu Lava Runner, and there's that cast down. Taking out the On-Crop Crasher, it is going to be a swing for 3, but cut the output in half.
Yeah, and, dealing with that On-Crop Crasher, that's pretty big for Sam because all of Seth's threats, Seth's attacking with 3 creatures, but they all have 1 power. So Sam's life total is not under a tremendous amount of pressure right now, even though Seth is attacking with 3 different creatures.
So we see Sam cycle the Fetid Pools, and then we see him play the Dragon Skull Summit. So he does have that red and black mana this turn. It's able to enter the battlefield untapped because that Canyon Slough is a swamp and a mountain. So we do have access to both red and black mana this turn as Seth enters his.
Yeah, and I mean, that could mean Fatal Push or Magma Spray. So there's definitely some interaction waiting potentially out of Sam's hand.
So there's the swing in for 3. We're going to keep stacking up these cards underneath. There is an entire fresh hand contained within these Bomat Couriers.
Yes.
A lot of potential in those. You never know what it's going to be. Chain Whirler comes down. It's going to deal 1 damage just to Sam. No creatures on the board to take down. No Planeswalkers on the board to really worry about. I think at this point, is Sam thinking about continuing to trade resources, or are his eyes on working his way towards really one of these big sweepers? He's got the Sweltering Suns in the main deck. He's got Hour of Devastation. Is he really looking to play those ones down? His Rekindling Phoenix is pretty resilient to quite a bit of that, though.
Yeah, I think that, Sam would love to have a Sweltering Suns in his hand on that turn. But, the Rekindling Phoenix does a decent job on defense here. He is down to 10, though, and the Rekindling Phoenix is something you don't really want to be blocking a Chain Whirler with.
And yeah, you have to decide, do you take down the Chain Whirler where you're just preventing 3 damage, or do you try and actually get in the way of some of these smaller, it's a 1-1 or it's a 1-2, maybe a 2-2 if Seth plays the right combination of spells. But that's not, you're going to be preventing less damage even if you are getting a creature off the battlefield. There's the swing out. It's the whole team, Earthshaker Kenra, Goblin Chain Whirler, Gitu Lava Runner, and 2 Bomat Couriers. That is a lot of face-down cards.
Yeah, and Sam's obvious block is on the Kenra, But if he does that, he's taking 6 damage and falling to 4, and then putting Seth in a position where he could just pick up the 5 cards underneath that one Beaumont Courier, potentially playing a land and having enough burn to finish off the game just left in his hand while having a board advantage.
And it looks like Sam is seeing the same block that you did, putting that Earthshaker Kenra, putting the Phoenix in front of the Earthshaker Kenra, but this is still an enormous hit. I mean, there are 9 cards face down at the moment, and Seth is running at least 12 of these cards that go straight to the face, in addition to just the fact that he's already got these creatures on board that need to be addressed.
And that 1 red mana being left open is dangerous in so many different ways. Can represent Wizard's Lightning here. It can draw Seth 5 cards with that Beaumont Courier, although activating a Beaumont Courier into 3 open mana is dangerous against Sam. We have already seen that ability get countered this weekend.
That was fantastic. In round 1, when we saw the Beaumont Courier get beaten by a fungal infection and a disallow to stop the activated ability.
Yes.
So it's going to be swing with the team, just like last turn, but this turn. More of these cards getting stacked up underneath. Really, we're running out of room on the playmat. And it looks like we're going to go ahead and get in front of this Lava Runner. Maybe just one of the better choices because it actually removes a 2 toughness creature. It might eventually be a 2/2. Is there any consideration for the fact that this also, it's the only wizard on the battlefield?
Yeah, I think that, Sam has definitely thought about that. He saw Wizard's Lightning in the second game, and by blocking this Gitu Lava Runner, he now turns Seth's 1 mana 3 damage burn spell into a 3 mana spell. And when you're at 6 life, that makes a world of difference. That's the potential of it being multiple turns until you die versus it being, 1 turn.
Yeah, surprisingly, I don't think Seth sleeved up any copies of Open Fire for this weekend. Wizard's Lightning, it is before the damage happens. That is going to be the Lightning Bolt. We might be finding ourselves down to 1 life up against the mono red aggressive deck, running Chain Whirler, running Shock, running Lightning Strike. There's a lot of ways that he does not end up winning this game.
So Seth there, showing us some very wise patience. A lot of people might have been tempted there to pop one of those Beaumont Couriers to look for that final point of damage in the form of something like a Shock. Seth understands that there's no reason to take that risk, that he's already presenting lethal on the board, and he can force Sam to use his mana to try to get back into the game before he really pulls the trigger and starts, exhausting resources in order to find that final point of damage.
Good point, because if he does miss, then really, before that Champion of Wits came down to the battlefield, you were going to be attacking with 2 1/1s into a single creature, and it really forced Sam to actually make that play to put any kind of pressure on the battlefield, try and come up with any way that at least forces Seth to do it a different way.
Yeah, and, now on Sam's end step here, Seth doesn't have to worry about the activated ability of Beaumont Courier being countered. Both of his creatures are already, dealt with via blockers, and if he does have a removal spell, again, all of his removal spells go to the face anyway, so he would just aim it at Sam.
Yep.
So here I imagine we may see him use a Beaumont Courier on Sam's end step.
Oh, we're going for the double activation. Discard your hand, both abilities on the stack, and we're going to get to pick up all of these cards. Is that what was that, 11?
Yeah, now any burn spell will win it for Seth. He drew a lot of cards. I imagine he's got 1, right?
12 cards in hand. And
a Chain Whirler does it too.
Let's get it done with a Chain. I mean, there's no counter spells. Do you see how many lands were in that stack too? I think that was the only one he had available to him. Oh my goodness. Beaumont Couriers, 11 cards. Get to untap with 12 cards in a red deck. That is not something that we have seen in historical red decks.
No, we have not.
I mean, that's just part of the power of this red deck, though, because we've been talking a little bit about how it's really able to go into the late game, even his version, which was not well-suited for it.
Yeah, and I mean, Seth's deck is much lower to the ground than these other red decks. It doesn't have the same late game. But Beaumont Courier, by itself, this 1 mana, 1/1 haste, provided Seth with this incredible endgame. And, he's able to activate both of those Beaumont Couriers and the activation, part of the activation cost is discarding your hand. That's not part of the resolution. So he discards his hand and discards his hand, and then both the abilities are on the stack, and then all the cards come to his hand, and suddenly, it's over.
Excellent. Well, I do believe that we are going to have an interview with Seth Manfield after his match win. Seth, it's T.J. Rogers and Jacob Van Lunen. How are you doing after that match win?
Feeling pretty good. That was my first match of the day, as it turns out, because I had 2 buys. With the deck I chose to play, it happens to be very die roll dependent, just because it's essentially the most aggressive version of the red deck, and there's a bunch of different iterations of red aggro. This one I think is the most aggressive of all of them, so I was pretty happy to win the die roll there, to be up against... Actually, game 1, he didn't show me any blue-black lands, I don't believe, so I was under the impression he was playing some sort of black-red deck, because basically the Grixis energy style decks kind of fell out of favor, so I was pretty surprised to see him on that deck. But yeah, I was very fortunate the 2 games I won to be on the play with double Bomat Courier, aggressive hands, and then perfect amount of lands. And then I don't even know why at the end of that last game I was kind of in the tank about whether to sacrifice my Bomat Couriers. And then, oh wait, that's 11 free cards. That's pretty good. Even though I had a Chandra that would have won anyway, I didn't want to gamble on drawing the land. So, yeah, that match felt good for sure.
So, coming into this event, you are just a couple of points behind Reed Duke to be the captain of the team, and you're sleeving up the most aggressive deck possible for this tournament. Are you feeling pretty good about your chances to end up ahead in that running and to be the captain of the hopefully U.S. national team?
I feel like I am. I mean, I think that Reed is very likely to be going into the last Pro Tour slightly ahead of me, and I think that if you bet against my team versus the Peach Garden Oath, I would say I am the underdog there, but it's not by a huge amount. Like I think like Reed probably wins maybe 40%, maybe I win 25 or 30%, and then maybe someone else wins the other 30%. I'm not really sure, but like I think I'm a slight underdog there to Reed, and then someone else could still come up from behind and catch either of us.
And of course, we were talking earlier today about how you've had such a long list of accomplishments, but being on the U.S. national team has not been one of them. So is that really something that you've got your eyes specifically set on going into this event as just another checkbox?
Yeah, I mean, if I got there this way, that would almost be the equivalent of winning Player of the Year to me. Although Player of the Year is an accomplishment I have not had the luxury of having. It might turn out that I finish in second place in the world twice and still do not get to play in the World Magic Cup, but that's the nature of being in the U.S. There's so many strong players here, and it would be nice. It would be a great list. It's basically the one accomplishment I don't have is Player of the Year, which would then allow me to play in the World Magic Cup. So that's why I'm here. I'm not assuming that I'm going to win Player of the Year, so I feel like I need to be here to battle to try to get to the World Magic Cup in any way that I can.
So I have a question about your deck. So post-sideboard, we've seen red decks go bigger and bigger over the course of time, and your deck doesn't really have that option. Like you can bring in some 4-drops, but you don't really go any bigger than that. Do you think that that's making people sideboard incorrectly against you in your testing, or do you think that just being this low to the ground is a way to punish the people who are maybe trying to beat control decks more than they were trying to beat them in previous weeks?
You know, I think this deck has the best Game 1 matchups kind of across the board, just because you're a very fast Hazoret. If you draw Hazoret and you play it on turn 4, you're pretty likely to be able to immediately attack with it because you're so aggressive. And then, like you're saying, Jake, after sideboard, there's a big problem with not having a ton of wiggle room. You do have some of the same cards that the other red decks have, like Chandra and Rekindling Phoenix. And so if the opponent doesn't know how aggressive you are, maybe they think you're on traditional red, something like that, they might sideboard incorrectly. That's certainly a possibility, but I think that people now realize that the Gitu Lava Runner style of red deck is something that is gaining some popularity. So it's important when playing against a red deck to look at very specific cards. Like if you're playing against black-red and you see Cinder Barons, it's probably like more of a control deck. If you're playing against Mono Red and you see Gitu Lava Runner, you know that it's a very aggressive deck most likely. So, and then if you're up against my version of the deck, you want to be boarding in as many control elements as you have access to. That means as much removal, etc., because my deck, as you're saying, doesn't have as great of a late game as some of the other decks. So if you're able to stop my early aggression, then it's going to be a problem.
Thank you. That was really informative.
Yep.
Yeah, some fantastic insight into the red deck. And Seth, good luck as you go forward in this one. This was your first round, but you've got plenty more to go, so good luck in your tournament.
Thanks, guys.
I'm excited to watch him draft. Have you watched Seth Manfield draft much?
Not in person, not from this perspective, actually. This is going to be my first time getting to see anything like that. But in the meantime, we've got a lot more standard on the way, and we'll be back with the Time Walk match after these messages. Welcome back to round 3 here in Columbus, Ohio at the U.S. Nationals. My name's TJ Rogers, joined by Jacob Van Lunen, and we are going to be having some Turtenwald matches available to us. It's going to be quite a matchup. On the right side, we have got Owen Turtenwald on the black-red deck up against Mark Rankin on blue-black mid-range. Now, Owen's deck looks a little bit reminiscent of what was actually able to take down the Pro Tour earlier this year.
Yeah, so Owen is playing a black-red aggro deck that features Heart of Kirin. Before, the RPTQ season really started, right after the Pro Tour, I talked to some people who are some of the best standard players in the world, and they thought that this black-red deck was so good that I would be a fool to be playing anything else in a standard tournament.
We see a Fatal Push take down the Beaumont Courier.
Yeah, and now, over the course of a few weeks, this deck has kind of just faded into the ether. But here, Owen Turtenwald, somebody who's known as somebody who plays the best deck in the format all the time, he's playing this black-red deck. And what that tells us is that Owen believes that this is the best deck in Standard.
And we're going to have to find out ourselves because he is trying to become part of that U.S. national team. He's trying to be the U.S. national champion. Glintsleeve Siphoner on the battlefield, eliminated by a lightning strike. A lot of back and forth from these players so far. We've seen the Beaumont Courier answered by a Fatal Push, the Siphoner answered by a lightning strike, but now it's a Chandra coming down to the battlefield, getting that activation, dealing 2 damage, and now this in combination with this Heart of Kirin means that you can plus the Chandra and then eliminate one of those loyalty counters to actually crew up your Heart of Kirin.
Yeah, so just 6 damage there out of that play from Owen.
Not too shabby.
Yeah, Mark's had a game plan that's lined up really well here, though.
So we're going to go ahead and activate the Heart of Kirin. Anyway, we're firing down the Vraska's Contempt to eliminate that Chandra. Owen removes a counter. Not a whole lot of benefit, but it can't hurt. And it is a Glory Bringer coming down to the battlefield. It's the Hasty Dragon in the air. Deals 4 damage to Mark, and the pressure is continuing to come down.
So Owen, when he activated that Heart of Kirin during Mark's turn, he was actually activating the Heart of Kirin many times. That way, the Vraska's Contempt would be countered with no target, and Mark would not gain the 2 life from the Vraska's Contempt.
Which is why we see Mark at 10 as opposed to the 12 that he would have been for that.
That's correct, yeah.
Oh.
So a real tight play there from Owen.
That's what separates him from, the average player, is seeing lines like this, activating it multiple times. We're going to see another attack in here. Mark down to 6, up against this Heart of Kirin, up against this Glorybringer. Really, this Heart has not done an enormous amount this game, but really it's been part of a 6-point life swing in eliminating that 2 life and swinging in for 4. Vraska's Contempt comes down to the battlefield off of that Torrential Gearhulk, and now we have got a 5-6 on the battlefield against Owen. He does have a couple of options. I believe a Braid is in this version of the deck, and it's going to be a Hazaret crewing up and attacking in for 4. So Mark's in a dangerous spot. He is at 4 life. Owen is on 5 mana and a couple of cards in hand, which means that next turn, not only could he potentially attack with this Heart of Kirin, but again, that activated ability of Hazaret is just so powerful as far as having a downward pressure on the game.
Yeah, it's really just this thing that's looming over the game, and Mark needs to find more cards like Vraska's Contempt to start padding his life total.
There's the attack in with the Heart of Kirin. That's going to take it down. You also saw that Owen had the 6 mana available and the cards in hand. Heading into a game 2, we're going to have Mark kicking things off. It's just a Swamp to lead the way into this game 2.
And Owen, happy to pick up game 1 there. I think that when you play one of these really aggressive decks, really one of the things you're hedging on is that your game 1 is going to be really good against your non-red opponents.
Yeah, we heard Seth Manfield say the same thing when he was doing that interview with us. He's playing the deck that he thinks has one of the best game 1s in the format. And then when you've got these absolutely, high-level players, really tight play, usually they can find a way to win in the next 2.
Yeah. Owen's deck, it's worth noting, is not quite as aggressive as the deck that we saw from Seth's, though still a very aggressive strategy here.
Yep, Beaumont Courier getting in, and we've just got a couple of lands available for Mark. Owen in his second turn, and I think he's debating a couple of options. I don't think he's going to have the ability to play an untapped land, and he will not. That Ether Hub actually setting him back a little bit. Cast down, taking it out while he does not maybe want to use that red mana, because that Ether Hub, he's only got the 1 energy. He's only going to get 1 shot.
Yeah, and he still has so many cards in hand. He's not going to want to exchange that full grip for just a pair.
Nah.
So
it's 2 mana. It's going to be a Scrap Heap Scrounger coming down to the battlefield. The 3/2 that has been pretty recursive. That Beaumont Courier available if needed, if a removal spell comes down. And Mark tried to build up a game plan. He's got 4 mana available right now. We're now in the territory of Vraska's Contempt as a potential option. Also just starting to maybe double spell.
yeah, and here we see Mark with an Essence Scatter in hand.
There's the Chain Whirler. Essence Scatter is going to take it down, so no more pressure on the battlefield for Owen, who puts down his 4th land. All 3 of his lands after that Ether Hub have had to enter the battlefield tapped.
Yeah, and that's slowed him down a lot here, especially being on the draw. It's just given Mark way too much time here.
Mm-hmm.
So Mark now getting to untap, put his 5th land onto the battlefield, and have Owen with no non-land permanents out, and Mark's still at 15. Mark's got to feel great about a game like this. He even has Vraska's Contempt in hand. If a Hazoret does come down, it's just, it's all Rankin here.
It was interesting seeing that the Canyon Slough was actually the last land to come down, because maybe it was in his hand. Maybe, Owen's certainly one of the best players in the world, so he might be thinking on another level about maybe cycling it. But if it was in his hand, it's curious that would be the last one he'd deploy, or potentially he did just draw it recently.
Yeah, I imagine he drew it recently because it definitely would have helped his tempo there, which is what you want to be doing in a matchup like this.
It's going to be a Mountain joining the battlefield, a Heart of Kieran coming on down, but nothing currently available to crew it. So this Champion of Wits is functionally the only creature on the battlefield at the moment.
Yeah, so Owen here, he's looking to use his remaining mana to get that Scrap Heap Scrounger back onto the battlefield here in Mark's end step.
And actually, yeah, so if we do that, he'll be able to exile that Beaumont Courier or the Goblin Chain Whirler, whichever one really. I don't think he's going to be recurring that card anytime soon. And we're going to be nicely set up. Cruise the Heart of Kieran to maybe get a block in the way, but a Fatal Push does take that down. We're left with just the Scrap Heap Scrounger on the battlefield. The Heart of Kieran is going to fall. So it's a swing in for 3. Owen's got 5 mana available after some mana troubles early on. He's now pretty much able to do whatever he'd like. He's got that Scrap Heap Scrounger, and actually he's sitting on an Unlicensed Disintegration in hand. This is another card that has been really floating around in those black-red lists, sometimes not even making the cut.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a powerful card in terms of what it does. The fact that you're, dealing incidental damage to your opponent while nullifying whatever play they might have made or spent 5 or even 6 mana for. Here we're in an interesting situation because Owen is really pressuring Mark with these recursive threats in the form of the Scrounger. And Mark doesn't want to use his removal spells on these because he wants to save that Contempt for something like a Hazoret. But here he's going to get punished pretty badly because of that Disintegration in Owen's hand.
So the Gifted Aetherborn comes down. This is a lifelink creature. It's not going to be around for too long, so that lifelink not going to be relevant. It's going to fall. Mark is going to fall down to 9 after that exchange, and with 2 of these Scrap Heap Scroungers available, another creature card in the graveyard to bring them back if there's any sort of removal. And yeah, Mark, he's got this Vraska's Contempt, but where do you point it? At the recursive smaller creature or on this massive, nearly unkillable, big top-end threat?
Yeah, and, you want to save those cards for the important threats, but sometimes you don't even have the option to.
So we're going to see an Abrade take down that Champion of Wits, and I think I might see an Essence Extraction, yes. So, Essence Extraction, actually a card that has been cropping up a little bit lately. It deals 3 damage to a creature, you gain 3 life, all for 3 mana, able to really kind of buffer his life total a little bit.
Yeah, so Mark able to stay at 8 there thanks to that Essence Extraction. Again, though, Owen, he has the Scrap Heap Scrounger in the yard. That's going to come back on Mark's end step. And Mark's going to need some way to get back into this game.
Untapping with 7 mana available against an opponent who is at 8 life, and I think all I see is an Argyl's Bloodfast and a Vraska's Contempt. That Bloodfast, maybe not phenomenal, and it's going to be a Chain Whirler as well. So really, the time's up. It's time to fire down this Vraska's Contempt. and we're going to eliminate one of these scroungers.
Yeah, and he needed to do so, otherwise he was going to die. Now he'll, get to fall to just 5 here.
Mm-hmm. But now, really, we're living off the top of the deck. The Arkel's Bloodfast at this stage in the game, he's got an Essence Scatter, but that doesn't address the fact that there is 7 damage on the board right now. We're kind of in a position of having to fire this down if he attacks and maybe try and find an answer, but I don't think there's any way that this ends up well. And that's going to be the case. It's Owen taking it down in 2 with the black-red deck from really kind of a couple of weeks ago, but it's making a show, and now this was Owen's first round as well, and it's already starting off with a pretty good showing.
Yeah, this black-red deck is so good. I wonder why we haven't seen as much of this lately.
I couldn't say for certain, but I do believe that we have got another matchup in this round. We're going to go down to the field now, and we are playing some speed matchup. It's Benjamin Corsi up against David Davila. We're going to see a Glintsleeve Siphoner join the battlefield, and it looks like we are back to a more comfortable speed. It's going to be a Branch Walker putting a land into hand. So on David's side, this is a Grixis Chain Whirler deck is what I see written down. Can you tell me a little bit about quite what that means? Chain Whirler, red in its casting costume. Now we're seeing really a Grixis 3-color strategy.
Yeah, so David calls this deck Grixis Greed, and his mana base is a nightmare. But he's got a lot of powerful spells here, and he gets to play Chain Whirler alongside cards like Siphoner, and he has Whirler Virtuoso, the Scarab God, tons of inexpensive removal. Even though he is so greedy, if his mana lines up well, he should be pretty well positioned against any sort of creature strategy.
And there it is. He takes down the Merfolk Branchwalker with that Chain Whirler. He's got all 3 colors on the battlefield and a Chain Whirler to accompany it. Energy has not been an issue. And we see Benjamin on another one of these Steel Leaf Stompy decks that we saw sort of trying to beat some of the Chain Whirler decks. I'm not really certain if he built this deck with a 3-color Chain Whirler deck in mind.
Yeah, I don't think many people are building their decks with the 3-color Chain Whirler deck in mind.
So we're going to see a Merfolk Branchwalker come down. It's going to get a counter. The Steel Leaf Champion is going to go to the graveyard, deciding that that's not really where he wants to be with the top of his library. An interesting choice, considering that that's one of the more powerful plays that he has.
Yeah, and it looks like Benjamin's hand has a pair of Galtas and a Sky Sovereign. So Benjamin really just needs to draw lands so that he can eventually deploy that Sky Sovereign. The Sky Sovereign will give him enough power on the battlefield to, play a Galta, at which point maybe he could turn the game around and sneak back in.
So we see a block with this Merfolk Branchwalker on the Chain Whirler. Normally the first strike would take it down, but Benjamin proactively putting this Blossoming Defense on the creature, trying to beat it in combat. And I think David's holding on to an Abrade.
Yeah, a risky play from Benjamin, but he was so far behind that he really kind of had to go for it. And now David has already buried Benjamin in card advantage. He's drawn an extra card off his Glintsleeve Siphoner. He killed a creature with the Goblin Chain Whirler. He dealt with 2 cards via that Abrade. Benjamin, he went up 1 card by drawing a land with that Branchwalker, but that's just not going to be enough.
Is that a Territorial Allosaurus on the battlefield?
It is.
Oh, I love it. 4-mana 5/5s are pretty fun.
Yeah. They're powerful, but
Vraska's not a fan.
Yeah.
All right, so Vraska.
Contemptuous Gorgon.
Yeah, the Territorial Allosaurus is going to go to the exile zone. David is going to go up to 21, and it's just going to be continued swings. This Glintsleeve Siphoner really giving David an enormous amount of card advantage in addition to everything else that it's doing. Being a menace creature means that it's very difficult to interact with in combat, and providing that energy for this greedy mana base, as he self-describes it. But it's a Branchwalker with a Llanowar Elf on top.
Yeah, and all this energy that all this energy that David is using with that Glintsleeve Siphoner, drawing extra cards when you're playing against a creature-based deck and you're a Grixis deck full of spot removal spells and threats, it is just incredibly difficult for a deck like Steel Leaf Stompy to overcome. It's why when in older formats like Modern, when a deck is without reach but is playing a lot of creatures, their worst matchup will be a deck that plays removal and Dark Confidant. It's a very similar type of interaction we're going to see here.
You know what card I'm looking to see is I'm just the Whirler Virtuoso in this Grixis Chain Whirler deck. I haven't gotten to see that card in quite some time. It's crept up a little bit. I saw it just a little bit last week. But I'm a fan of that card.
It's a very, very powerful card. I think it's become less popular in a world of Goblin Chain Whirler. But you can always, not use all your energy and make a ton of guys at once. You can always, create the guys on the end step when you need to pressure the Planeswalker, create them during combat when they need to block. So even though it forces the Chain Whirler will force you to play your Whirler Virtuoso differently than you might have in the past, it's still a very powerful card.
Also, you could always just put that energy right into your Glintsleeve Siphoner. Keep
That's
drawing
true.
additional cards. It's a 2/3 at worst. That's not so bad. So it's going to be continued attacks. It's a first striking 3/3 and a menace 2/1. Benjamin has been able to do so little as far as getting in the way of this. We have seen twice now that really the highest level of interaction that we've seen is blocking a Goblin Chain Whirler.
Yeah, and every time Benjamin went for the block on the Goblin Chain Whirler, he was essentially just throwing cards into his graveyard. It's not even like these were favorable blocks.
And the Galta is getting farther away each time. Having sort of those powerful creatures on the battlefield means that it is reducing the cost of it. But right now, Benjamin's just at a flat 4 mana, no matter how you look at it. Oh, there's the Whirler.
And now Benjamin, even if he has the 5th land for Sky Sovereign, he's still in a really rough position here.
So the Steel Leaf Champion is hitting the battlefield. We've got the 5/4. That's something that can block profitably against this board. If nothing else, it gets in the way of Chain Whirler. It's going to reduce some of that damage, and most importantly, it's not going to end up in the graveyard at the end of that exchange.
That's absolutely true. David could have another removal spell here. He could have even chose to start making Thopters on that previous turn because in the green deck, we've talked about it before, and we can talk about it as much as we want to, but flyers are not great for this green strategy.
Especially, Heart of Kieran about the only way to get through it if you are running it. And in this particular one, I do think we have a couple of copies of it, maybe 2 or 3, was it?
Yeah, 3 copies.
Okay. So we're just going to keep getting aggressive with this. The Whirler Virtuoso is going to get in, the Glintsleeve Siphoner, the Chain Whirler. We see a block there. It might just be an acceptance of what's going to happen. You're still getting in 4 damage. Benjamin's still going to find himself down to 4, and now you've got the Scarab God. This deck was aptly named.
Yes, it was aptly named.
Grixis Greed, as he calls it. Grixis Chain Whirler on...
It's the greediest. It's basically a black-red deck, much like Owen's, but it's splashing the Scarab God, Whirler Virtuoso, and Torrential Gearhulk.
So we see Benjamin kicking us off with a Blooming Marsh. It's just a mountain on David's side. Incidentally, that's actually my favorite mountain art in the game. Heart of Kieran joining the battlefield, and it's going to be a Dragon Skull Summit as well, followed by a Glintsleeve Siphoner. Looks like the players are going to be picking up their pace just a little bit when you're on the time walk. These things are available.
Yeah. Sort of fast forward them a little bit.
Exactly. The Scrap Heap Scrounger comes on down. We're going to swing on in for 4. David's going to fall down to 16, gets to untap. But now we do have access to this Glintsleeve Siphoner, nothing that's going to get in the way of it, and a Harness to Lightning actually coming in and pointing itself at this Scrap Heap Scrounger, a card that, again, fell out of favor for a little bit, and only recently in the last week or so has been actually finding its way into deck lists again.
Yeah, now, interesting thing there, David able to use that Harness Lightning during his upkeep to deal with the Scrap Heap Scrounger, thus not only killing the Scrounger, but giving him enough energy so that he can draw an additional card off the Glintsleeve Siphoner.
Because he nets the 1 energy. It gives you 3 energy, and then you're able to use any amount to remove the creature. It's Territorial Allosaurus coming into the battlefield, crewing up the Heart of Kieran, and we're going to see what we can do. It's a 5/5 on the battlefield. It's going to start swinging in pretty happily. Glintsleeve Siphoner continuing to really kind of dominate this board at the moment. It's going to keep drawing cards too.
And David now, just an embarrassment of riches here.
So you were talking earlier a little bit about how the Steel Stompy decks, are really trying to actually get themselves into race positions against these red decks. Now, this one, it is a Chain Whirler strategy, but it's not so directly a red strategy. Is that something that you think that same logic might apply in the strategy? Or, what different ways might you be able to navigate a matchup against really an unknown archetype?
So when you're playing against basically any type of deck like this and you're playing the Steel Leaf Stompy deck, you just have to play your threats in the battlefield as fast as you possibly can and try to see how quickly you can get your opponent dead. Against the white control decks, there's a lot of play to play around cards like Settle the Wreckage or Fumigate. But here, you really just have to, play with the hand you've been dealt, if you will.
So Chain Roller on the battlefield, a Chandra as well. The Chandra is actually providing the additional 2 red required for that Chain Roller. And now Benjamin just trying to get it done with the Territorial Allosaurus. I think we were going actually face on this one, and we're going to take down the Chain Roller. So it's a 5-5 on the battlefield, trying to contend with a Chandra and a Glintsleeve Siphoner. The Chandra unable to take down the Territorial Allosaurus, at least not single-handedly. We see a lot of those 4 toughness creatures answered pretty happily with Chandra, but this Allosaurus is 5-5.
Yeah, 5 toughness, very nice in this current standard format. You're playing against cards like Glorybringer, you're playing against cards like Chandra, Torch of Defiance. 5 is kind of a magic number to survive through your opponent's cards that cost 4 and 5.
Yep, basically you get through the Glorybringer, really just Fight with Fire becomes the final option.
And that card is more just a sideboard card than anything else.
So we're going to take this up. We see ourselves in a Braid. What are we going to do with that one? Could be 2 damage, could be dealing 3 damage to the Allosaurus if you so choose. I think we're going to take the 2 damage, and these players speeding up a bit. Blossoming defense against a Vraska's Contempt. Benjamin draws his card for the turn, attacks on in for 5. It's a block by the Siphoner. It's a Merfolk Branchwalker and a Braid on the Territorial Allosaurus. That combines with the 2 damage from the Glintsleeve Siphoner. We get a counter onto the Merfolk Branchwalker. A Magma Spray takes it down, and now it's just a Chandra on the battlefield as these players are trying to get to a point of taking it down. We're going to take this up. It's Supreme Will, and we're just going to cast that one, deciding that is worth more than the 2 damage. A Scrap Heap Scrounger comes on back. We're going to take a look at the top 4, and we are going to take a card, eliminate it. Magma Spray takes down the Scrounger, and it's back to Benjamin.
Yep. Ooh, this is just the best emblem time.
Chandra ult in high speed, deal 5 damage, and get a Scarab God. It practically has haste.
Yeah. Scarab God doing a Hazard impression. It's Halloween.
Llanowar Elves comes on down, and now all Dave needs to do is cast 2 spells. That's it. That's going to be the name of the game, and that is going to close it up. A Chandra emblem. I couldn't be happier as a way to end round 3.
Chandra emblem's pretty good.
It's pretty good. So we're going to have round 4 coming on up. We will join you there. We'll see you right after these messages.
Looking for a place to hang out and play Magic? Head to your local game store this and every Friday to play Friday Night Magic events. Get more info at magic.wizards.com/FNM.